Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to take a look at a game that I played many years ago, back in 1985, against a very talented junior named Adam Leaf. We were both juniors at that time. He lived in California, I was near California, in Nevada, and I think at that point we were probably the two highest rated juniors on the West Coast. So Fishbein overtook us both, I think, maybe a couple of years after that, but at any rate. So this was played in the U.S. Junior Open, which was a pretty important tournament for players under, I think, 20 years of age. And anyway, this game was played. We were the top two seeds. This was played in round 6. He was 5-0 at this point, and I had 4.5 out of 5. And I had white in this game, so it was a very important game for the standings. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this game this week and next week as well. And but we're going to get through the whole game today, and well, you'll get a sense after next week's show as to why we did this. Now, about this game and the aftermath. So I lost the game, and Leaf, who was taking lessons with International Master Jack Peters, showed him the game, of course, afterward. And because Peters is the chess columnist for the LA Times, and because it's a nice game, as you'll see, it got published there. After that, Robert Byrne, who was the columnist until a couple of years ago for the New York Times, he saw it, and he published it in the New York Times with his own notes. Okay, well, the New York Times is published overseas as well. It's called the International Herald Tribune in that case, but it's basically the New York Times in an international edition. Well, after that, it got seen in Germany and Russia, and got published in those countries as well. So this was, I would say, the worst instance, but something that was actually quite common for me, unfortunately, that I got all of my losses published somewhere or other. Not all of them, but many of my losses published, and none of my wins. So perhaps it's for this reason that I ended up becoming a chess presenter, so I can at least show some of my successful outings and not just the nice games where I lose. Okay, well, at any rate, let's take a look at the game. I had white, and I've entitled this show "How Not to Play Against the Pircs," and we'll see a little bit of that very soon. Okay, so e4, c6. So it's a Caro-Kann at the moment, but don't worry, it'll turn into a Pirc or a modern very soon. So d4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, knight f3, d6. Okay. All right. It's still a modern, but as soon as black plays knight g to f6, if he plays it in some timely fashion, it's very likely to turn into a Pirc, and that's in fact what happens. So, played bishop to e2. I should mention that certainly another possibility here for me would be to play the move a4, and then follow up with bishop to c4. Okay, more about this later, much more. Okay, I played bishop to e2, more modest approach, which is also okay. e5, castles, knight g to f6. Okay, so now it's a Pirc, not a modern any longer. All right, bishop e3, and this is the point behind playing h3, so I don't have to worry about knight to g4. And this is theoretical, so this is maybe not. It's not the main line position, but it's a very common position, and it's happened in dozens of games. Okay, I played d takes e5, kind of a quiet approach. a4 is also possible. Here, queen d2, queen c7. I think actually, yeah, again, a4 is the main move here. So anyway, this, queen c7. Okay, rook f to d1 can be played. I played rook a to d1, rook e8. All very, very common. Okay, and now I played bishop to c4. Now, a4 for sure would have been safer, and I think after a4, it's a position where I still have maybe not an advantage, but reasonable chances for an advantage. So black is a little bit passive. It'll take him still a few moves to kind of unravel everything, and okay, until he does, white still has at least prospects for an edge. Okay, but I played bishop to c4, and this was criticized by both Peters and Byrne. So I unfortunately don't have the notes from Germany, wherever that got published, or from Russia. Now in Russia, it got published, I believe, in their magazine 64. So if any of my readers or my readers, excuse me, my listeners are from either of those countries, from Germany or Russia, or really anywhere from the former Soviet Union. If you got the magazine 64 in those days, if you can dig this up, that would be great. I'd really love it. So if you can find it, drop me a note on the server, and I'll send you my email address, and we can arrange it that way. Or you can write to me through my blog. There's the contact link on that page. So that's at chessmind.powerblogs.com. So either way, I'd love to see this and see how Russian or German analysts made fun of me as well. Okay, anyway, back to this position. After bishop to c4, both commentators, Byrne and Peters, had a remark. So Peters just said that white still has a good game after 12a4 instead of bishop to c4. And Byrne said that, again, I should have continued in the same vein, this quiet positional style, with the prophylactic 12a4 to prevent a black expansion on the queen side. So everyone condemned bishop to c4. Why? Well, b5, bishop to b3, and okay, so this I had seen, and I thought, all right, if b4, which Byrne mentions, knight a4, knight e4, queen b4, and this is kind of an interesting situation. Generally speaking, it's in black's favor to grab a center pawn in exchange for the, well, not centralized b pawn. On the other hand, I have superior mobilization, so you can see all my pieces are out. They're pretty active, so even though black has grabbed a pawn of better quality, I think overall white should have an advantage, and Byrne says that as well. However, instead of b4, black played a5, and okay, now all of a sudden I realize the situation is kind of troubling. See, the problem now is that black threatens not only a4, which traps my bishop, well, doesn't just trap it, it wins it, but black also threatens to play b4 now, because if the knight runs away, he takes on e4, and the a5 pawn will protect the b4 pawn, so I can't grab it back. And if, for instance, I play the move a3 here, which Peters notes, then b4, takes, knight a4, and here, c5. And this is really quite unpleasant. So he threatens to take on e4. Maybe. Actually, that's not necessarily the case, because I can play either queen to d5 or bishop takes f7 check and then queen to d5. So that's not so much the threat, but okay, black could play something like bishop to b7 and then gang up on the pawn, or, more to the point, there's the immediate threat of c4, which basically slams the door on this bishop on b3. Furthermore, of course, the bishop on b3 protects the knight on a4, which is under attack by the rook. So when there was a pawn on a3 and a black pawn on a5, or on a7, that wasn't really an issue. But here, it is. So if we still had a pawns, I could just play bishop to c4, because, as I said, knight takes e4 isn't a threat. But I can't do that here. So this would be very, very bad for black, or for white. Great for black, as Peters points out. Okay, so here you might try to figure out what white's move ought to do in this position. So how can I try to fight on here? I'm already in some trouble. Well, the answer is this. I played knight to g5, which Peters labeled desperation. Okay, well, it has a clear threat, and black has to react to it. You could play rook to e7 or rook to f8, and he chose rook f8. Okay, and now I played a3. And we'll see what my point is in a moment. About this, Byrne writes the following. So he says, White's last two moves were indeed tempting, since black cannot get rid of the bind except by what he now plays, whereby Monokroussos would obtain a rook plus 2 pawns for 2 minor pieces. However, this was not an endgame, but a middle game in which Leaf could use his minor pieces to the full. So says Byrne. Okay, well that probably gives you a hint as to what happens over the next few moves. Black plays h6, kicking my knight. Of course, if I go back, if I retreat to f3, then black will play b4, and then play c5, and it'll be just like the position we looked at a couple of moves ago. So, on I go. Oops. Eek. try that again. Knight takes f7. Rook f7 is forced. Now bishop takes h6. Okay, so I can take the rook, maybe not any time, but it's not running away just yet. So I grab another pawn, and I'm also preparing to play queen of g5. And in fact, after b4, I played queen of g5. So this, of course, this helped to make the game publishable, because when you have a position like this, it lends itself to diagrams. And the point, of course, is that if b takes c3, I play queen takes g6, and I'm not only threatening to take the rook on f7, I'm also threatening checkmate in one move with queen takes g7. And in this position, black would be just dead lost. So this would be delightful, and I would have been very happy if this had occurred, but of course I was playing a very strong player. Leaf, by the way, probably the overwhelming majority of you have no idea who he is. And that's because, like many very talented American juniors, he went to college and pretty much gave up the game. But he was very close to an IM already as a teenager, and this is back when that was an even more impressive accomplishment than it is now. And but he just quit. So he went on and I think studied mathematics and computer science at Stanford, and has gone on to a satisfying career in that field, or in those fields, and has left chess behind. But it was very clear that he would have been an IM very easily, and quite possibly a GM too if he had continued to play. Anyway, chess has lost, the computer science field's gain, I'm sure. At any rate, as I said, he was a very strong player, and of course wouldn't fall for something so simple. Played a very good move here, knight to c5. Okay, so now he's threatening to grab the bishop, and he's also clearing a path for the queen to protect the rook too, should that be necessary, or for the queen to help in general on the 7th rank. So it covers f7 and can also help with the defensive g7 if necessary. Okay, well, black is also threatening, in addition to taking the bishop on b3 and taking the knight on c3, also there's the possibility of simply blocking the diagonal with bishop to e6. So I don't have time for something like bishop to a2, b takes c3, queen takes g6. So I take, he takes, I take, he takes. Okay, and now I played queen to e3, kicking the knight, and he retreats to e6. So I've got a rook and 2 pawns for 2 minor pieces. I have enough material. I saved my e-pawn, amazingly enough, and I'm even minutely ahead in development at this point. However, it looks evident, really, that black is simply better. So Peter's comment, for instance, is that white has enough material, but black controls all the important squares. And, okay, if we look, it seems right. So covers d5, covers c5, covers d4, e4, f4, okay, and with the pawn as well. All the squares that my rooks can use on the d file are well covered. So the queen covers d6, the bishop covers d7, the queen and the knight on e6 cover d8, f5 is covered. So yeah, every central square, or even near central square, is under black control. Only c4 is maybe available, but first of all, I have no piece that can use the c4 square. That's this guy. And he could also play bishop to a6 and take care of that one as well. So it looks like white really has to be worse in a position like this. So despite the material advantage that I've got, there's really not very much I can do. So I had some hopes here at this point of maybe trying to slowly but surely push on the king side. So maybe play after knight to e2, something like g3 and maybe f4, and slowly push over there. But as we'll see, I really don't end up with time for that. Black's queenside play is just much too fast. So he plays bishop to a6, and now I have to worry about things like knight to d4 or knight to f4. So I move my rook out of the way. And now a nice move, he plays c5. And as Byrne writes here, it was clear after c5 that the white position was constricted and that the 3 black minor pieces were functioning beautifully. So I'm clearly in trouble here. I've got, again, a rook and a couple of pawns, but they're playing no role. My rooks have nothing to do, and pushing my kingside pawns is, first of all, rather difficult to achieve, and secondly, if I do achieve it, it might be suicidal. So what do I do at this point? I'm still kind of worried about a move like knight to d4, or maybe him taking and playing knight to d4. So I played, okay, well actually, yeah, I played c3 here. And now, however, since my queen no longer protects the a-pawn, he takes. And here black makes a very nice move. And it's, okay, I don't know that it's the computer's first choice, it doesn't really matter, but it's just a very attractive move, I think. So what black came up with, again, you can see if you can figure it out for yourself, is bishop to c4. And it's a rather abstract looking move, but the idea is that black is now going to take over, well, he's doing two things at least with bishop to c4, maybe even three things. Okay, the least important thing, at least for the moment, is that he's taking over the d5 square, or giving further defense to that square, which enables the knight from f6 to move someplace else. Maybe this knight could go to h5 and consider going into f4. Okay, that's not really the big idea, but it's a fringe benefit. He has further control over an important central square. And I would like to put my rook on d5, because it hits the pawn on c5, it's the pawn on e5, and it lets me double on the next move. So it's good for that purpose. Okay. A second point is that it kind of constipates, to put it in a rather vivid way, my queen side. So I can't ever play a move like c4, which would let my knight come into c3 and then maybe play knight to d5 afterward. So c4 would involve a pawn sacrifice, but I would get quite a lot more space over on the queen side to try to fight back. So it's very nice from that perspective. It kind of screws the pawn, it kind of grinds my structure into the dust. I can't move forward. I'm locked up. I'm paralyzed. And black is going to be able to make further progress on the queen side. And that's the third point, which is that in addition to taking over the d5 square and preventing me from maybe sacking the pawn to fight for the d5 square myself, it also takes control over, the b3 square, which after moves like a4 and rook to b8, we'll see can become rather promising for black and very uncomfortable for me. Okay, well here I played rook to b1. Okay, if the d file isn't going to give me anything, I should switch files, so I do. Rook to b8. And now I played f3, protecting my e-pawn. It's not a job for the queen to protect such a pawn. And there's no real problem on the diagonal. I mean, sometimes f3 can be a bad move in a middle game if black can fight for and take over the a7 to g1 diagonal. In other words, this diagonal. But, okay, there's a pawn sitting on c5, so that's not a problem. And putting a queen on d4, okay, that doesn't really make any sense with the pawn on c3, let alone the knight on e2 and the queen on d4. So, f3 is perfectly fine. Okay, now black plays a4, creating an outpost on b3, as Peters points out, and as I've already mentioned. And here I've got some real problems. Okay, what do? I played g3. So I'm trying to crawl out on the king side, as I mentioned before. I'd like to play king f2, f4, and do something to distract him before the queen side becomes a big problem. Well, in leaf comes. He plays rook to b3, preparing a couple of things. So one is to double, play the queen to b6 or b7, and also, of course, there's a threat to take the pawn on a3. So I played queen to c1. He plays queen to b7. I played king f2. Notice, I should point out, that black has a threat, just to take twice, and then to play bishop takes e2. So for that reason, I play king f2. Now he plays queen to b5, which has kind of half a threat. So there's the idea of playing bishop takes e2. Now, I can't play king takes e2 because it's illegal, and I can't play rook takes e2 because rook takes b1. But I could play rook takes b3. So bishop takes e2, rook takes b3. I could do that. So there's no real rush for me to play rook takes b3, but it's inevitable. Sooner or later, I'm going to have to do this, and I just did it here. So, and in fact, black is really going to kind of insist on this because he can play bishop to d3 next. Let me get rid of all that stuff. With bishop to d3 coming up anyway, what can I do? Right, so if I play rook takes b3 then, it's the same thing. And if I play rook to a1, then he can play rook to b2, and then this knight is dropping off the board. So it's miserable. So I took, he recaptured, I played queen to b2, and the game is just about over. There's really only one small problem left for black to solve, and Adam had no difficulty in solving it. So see what you can do to force the game to end very quickly. Okay, well, the move chosen by Leaf here was bishop takes e2. I played rook takes, and he simply plays c4 when I have absolutely nothing that can be done against knight c5 followed by knight to d3, or maybe knight to a4. And the pawn continues to march, and my c-pawn becomes weak, and I just have no counterplay whatsoever. It's dead lost. And so here I resigned. So even though I continue to have that slightly favorable material balance, my position is hopeless. So I gave up here. So what's the big lesson to learn from this? Well, you have to be very, very careful, going back here, about black's queenside expansion. So bishop to c4 was bad because black simply plays b5 and a5. And although I kind of wriggled and writhed around trying to avoid a terrible fate, ultimately, with some nice play, my doom was sealed. Okay, and that's how it certainly seemed. That's what two very strong analysts found. I mean, Peters was an IM who was of GM strength. I mean, he achieved many norms, but this was back in the day when they expired, so he often had two norms, and he would get the third after the first one would have expired 6 months ago. So he was a GM strength player. Byrne, of course, was a grandmaster, still is, he's still alive, and was a candidate even. So two very, very strong analysts took this game as basically a very nice positional crush. I did as well, and it's all very logical. The play had a nice flow to it, or I made a positional mistake. I tried to pull out the tactical bag of tricks and made it interesting, but ultimately his minor pieces were better than my rook and pawns, and he was able to finish the game convincingly. Okay, well, we'll take a second look at this game next week. Please, for your own benefit, don't whip out the computer, but see what you can come up with on your own. See if you can find any ways for white to improve, other than, of course, earlier, with a simple move like a4 here, or maybe even better, right, to play a4 in this position, so the bishop can come to c4 in one shot. So anyway, have a look, see what you can find, and we'll compare notes next week. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.